that you would want to do anyways, but the problem is that there are certain things called formalities, and if they're not complied with, you can lose protection.
So what are some of the common misconceptions regarding LLCs and liability protection? There's probably a lot of assumptions that people make about things that can really come back around and bite them in the end if they're not aware of them. So what are some of those common misconceptions?
There's a lot of things, and I think this ties in really well with what we were talking about when we talked about formalities and talking about kind of the idea of a business structure. The LLC is favored by a great majority of people because of the fact that there are less formalities imposed by the state. When we said earlier whether or not an LLC or corporation is the right choice, I said these days it's not so much whether an LLC or a corporation is the right choice. It's usually, for most people, what is the right tax selection for my LLC, and that's because really, with an LLC, you can choose to be taxed in a number of different ways. You can choose to be taxed as a corporation, as a C corporation, as an S corporation, or as a regular LLC. And the reason the LLC is advantageous is because state statutes for virtually all states do not require as much formality as corporations. In fact, I would say for all 50 states and D.C. that formality is not as strict. Corporations are required to have meetings of shareholders. They're required to have meetings of directors every year. The failure to hold those meetings will cause you to lose your status as a corporation in the eyes of the state. Additionally, when you make certain decisions, you have to put your director's hat on with a corporation. You have to put your shareholder's hat on and sign your name as a shareholder. There's a lot of formalities that you'd have to do. So corporations can become very cumbersome for the small business owner, and most of the time, it doesn't warrant the expense of all that formality, particularly since you can choose to use an LLC as your structure, but have it taxed in, like I said, all those different ways. The other thing is the less formalities that you have to deal with, the less likely there are to be any errors or mistakes. So that's where the LLC becomes a very favorable entity. The other thing about LLCs that is tremendously important that you do not have with corporations, and if you get nothing else out of this today, please get this, is that LLCs have what's called charging order protection, and I'll explain what that is. Most businesses, if set up correctly, most business entities, I should have said, if set up correctly, will protect your personal assets from activities that occur in the business. Okay, somebody says you violated our agreement. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue your business. In most cases, provided that you ran your business the right way, they would be limited only to suing your business. So they would also be limited to the assets in the business. So here's the issue, though, with corporations. Corporations, however, generally will not protect your business assets from personal liabilities. I know that sounds kind of like a play on words, but let's think about that one. In the event, let's say, and we'll use the horrible car example again, or we could use another one, but that's the one that always comes to mind. And let's say you're driving, you mangle somebody, we'll use the same exact numbers here. You have a $500,000 insurance policy. The person is really hurt, disfigured, disabled. They sue you for $1 million. If you had a corporation set up and you were driving in your own capacity individual, you're driving around on Sunday with your family, you were not engaged in anything related to the business, they would sue you as a person, personally, because you were acting not on behalf of your company, you're just acting on your own. What would happen, though, is if your personal assets ran out, but you had $1 million in your corporation, the problem with corporations is that corporate stock, the stock shares that you receive when you own stock in your own corporation, that stock is personal property. It is not protected if you are sued personally. A creditor or someone who's trying to collect against you would be able to seize that stock in your corporation. That's because the laws of all 50 states and D.C. for the most part, do not protect corporate stock from personal liability. The corporate stock is what's called personal property. And as a result, if you're sued and a creditor, someone who sued you and won, wants to collect, what they would do is they would get an enforcement order, and they could go a number of different ways. They could get onto your property with the judicial order. They could have the sheriff with them and go into your house and start seizing assets until they find enough assets to equal the amount that they are owed. Okay? And I keep up to date with all this stuff because I am a Texas attorney, and I go to a lot of these recommended courses that we have to take for our hours, but I spend all my time in the creditor collection classes and the business entity classes. The reason is that there's a group of attorneys out there, and what they do is they collect money on judgments, and they help folks get money out of cases after someone's won a case. And it's a necessity that you have attorneys that do that, because there are cases where people are really hurt and situations arose. But there's also a lot of situations that are frivolous, that are unscrupulous, that really shouldn't occur. And I go to these classes to learn exactly what they do. And most attorneys, if you have a corporation, they are very, very happy. The reason, there is no business protection from personal liabilities. In other words, that corporate stock is sitting out there, they can seize it. Once they take the stock, which would be that piece of paper, the stock certificate, they can control the business. And what they would do then is they would vote to dissolve the business. Why? Because they would want all of that money or whatever assets are in there to flow through to you, and then they can basically get after it. In fact, at one of the recent trainings that I went to, it was in May, they talked a lot about internet domain names. They were talking about, how to find value in this person that you have a judgment against. And they're saying, what does the guy own or what does the girl own? And they were going through, okay, did you check this? Did you check this? Did you check this? Because, in most states, once you get the right to collect and you get what's called a receivership turnover, you basically, think they own that's non-exempt according to the state law, you can take. And so one of the things that came up was website domain names. And, they were saying, there's a lot of value in domain names. Well, that's just one example where if that was owned by the corporation or owned personally, bam, it's wide open. The LLC has what's called charging order protection. And I know this has been a real long example, but this is a detailed area. But the advantage you'll get with a properly run LLC is that if in the same situation you hit somebody, there was a $500,000 overage, and your business was sitting out there thriving, those creditors, for the most part, would not be able to get to the assets of the business. They would have a very tough time.
They could come after it if it was an S Corp or a C Corp, but if with an LLC, it has a large amount of protection.
It has what's called charging order protection. And the reason charging order protection is in place, and this goes back, we'll go all the way back to England here, where we've got most of our law from. And the reason that we got to go back to England is that the business structure that the LLC sort of derives some of its heritage from is the partnership. And I want you to compare for a minute a common company like Dell or Microsoft. They sell stock to hundreds of thousands of people. And so, imagine you're in the grocery store and you walk by somebody and they're a stockholder, the same company that you own stock in. You guys both own stock in Microsoft. Well, you don't know him, he doesn't know you. And you look at each other and you pass. Well, that's because in companies where you're going to sell large numbers of shares to individuals, over 100 or more, then generally people use corporations, okay? And for that reason, the ownership of the corporation is not really considered a very personal matter or a personal decision, because stock is traded, it changes hands, and you can just look at some of the large companies and see that that's the case.